All right, guys, we have a very, very, very exciting video today. Now, if you saw my community post this week, you will have expected this video, but I am very excited because today is going to be a really cool crossover between two of my favorite writers of all time. Of course, we're going to be taking a Gebserian analysis of the character Judge Holden from the novel Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy. Now, Blood Meridian is my favorite novel of all time. Now, that's not saying too much because I don't read a ton of novels. You know, and I read some in school, and by read, I mean I read the first 40 pages and then spark notes my way through the rest. So, you know, there's a couple novels I've read: Catch-22, Grapes of Wrath, The Stranger, The Crossing, which is excellent, by the way. It's another Cormac McCarthy. The Crossing is not a perfect book. I don't prefer it to Blood Meridian, but I think about that story all the time. The last 2 pages of The Crossing is some of my favorite writing of all time. I just adore that ending. It's such a perfect it's like the stuff of genius, and it's so simple. It ends on kind of a quiet note, but it's like a microcosm that just perfectly sums up the entire themes of the book. It's a brilliant work. But Blood Meridian, this was released, I believe, in '85. Cormac, for a long time, was the greatest living author, even though Thomas Pynchon might have a word about that. And unfortunately, he died about 2-3 years ago, and this is all we have. Now, Judge Holden. We have to talk about Judge Holden. Actually, let's talk about the plot for this real quick. So, Blood Meridian, by the way, you need to read this book. This book is amazing. I understand why you wouldn't like it. Give it the first 2 or 3 chapters. If you don't like it, then if it's not your thing, the style's maybe a little obscure, then toss it out. But I love this book. So this book follows the kid. That's his name. They don't really give him a first name. Essentially, his journey, he's just kind of born to a drunk father, dead mother, and it's a story about him adapting to the brutality that is the West. Back in the day, back in the 19th century, I think it was in 1849, or somewhere around there, where this book took place. And simply put, he just has to navigate his way through a more or less evil world, a world of extreme violence that is beautifully described, by the way. Extreme violence, extreme corruption, evil, moral compromise, just terrible stuff. So long story short, he kind of messes around for a little. He doesn't really know what to do with his life, just in a different way. And until eventually he gets thrown in prison, and then him and Toadvine, his buddy, say, hey, free us from prison. John Glanton, leader of the Glanton gang, who happens to come into town when they're prisoners, and we'll join your gang and we'll help you hunt people. Now, what does the Glanton gang do? The Glanton gang makes deals with the Mexican government to go scalp Native Americans who are maybe like Comanches or violent Native Americans. The problem is John Glanton is an insane psychopath, and we'll get to Judge. That's what this is about. He's not even a real leader. Judge Holden's the real leader. But the problem is these people have, if they have any morals, it's evil morality. So they'll just kill innocent people, take their head, and just, there you go. Hey, why not? They all look the same. They can't verify. So they just do terrible things. And you see the kid, how he navigates that, and his relationship with the judge really is where the book comes alive. And we'll get to the end there. So after all that, let's jump right into it, because this might be a longer video. I might break this into part 1 and 2, but we'll see. So Judge Holden is the number 2, if you want to call it that officially, in the Glanton gang. He's really the number 1. He is an eminently competent. He is hyper competent at almost everything he does. He is hyper intelligent. He is hyper knowledgeable. He's good with his hands. He can build things. He can destroy things. He's incredibly violent. He seems to win every conflict that there is, whether it be through violent means or non-violent means. He's just simply hyper competent at everything he does. You cannot kill this man. He's just the man. He's constantly monologuing about his philosophy, his worldview, which is, by the way, why this is my favorite novel. The real reason, besides the absolutely genius and beautiful writing that is on display. I mean, there's some beautiful stuff here. Really, it's the philosophical discussions it generates for me personally, combined with the other aspects that really kind of solidify. Yes, and I love it, believe it or not. I am a man. I do love the masculine stuff, so seeing all the violence, it was great. It does make you feel kind of like, oof, yeah, this is a man's world, baby. Okay, so let's get right into it. So Judge Holden is also Judge Holden is, I don't know how old he is. He's got to be in his like 40s or 50s, maybe late 30s. But he has the face of a baby, which we're going to talk to, more or less, not literally, but he has the face of a borderline adolescent because he's just so young, and we'll get into that. So more or less, I think Judge Holden is a representation of the deficient aspects of each structure. Of course, that would be the magic structure, mythical structure, mental structure, and to a certain extent, integral structure, even though I'm not going to have too much to say about that. He represents them simultaneously, and I also believe he kind of represents Lucifer, the dark god that endures. If God is the yin, I think he is the yang. He never sleeps, he will never die. That's like saying, well, let's just get the yin without the yang. You simply cannot remove them. Lightness with darkness, I don't know what to say. There's no getting around it, but we'll flesh that idea out. So we're going to start with the magic structure. So the most obvious example of the deficient of Judge Holden representing the deficient aspect of the magic structure is his insatiable lust for ultimate power, complete autonomy to enslave literally everything in the world to his will, to his ego. That is obviously the magic structure. The releasing yourself, that's a product of releasing yourself from the magical determinism of nature and the magic structure. To be against something and to be against something for its own sake is textbook magic structure. Okay? The will to power, Nietzschean will to power, that is where that comes from. Remember the pygmy tribe example. They wanted to release themselves from the magical unified world because this magical unified world was dangerous and it was constantly screwing them over. So they did their rituals, they did their rites, and then through that they realized, hey, we can release ourselves from nature, and then we get the mythic structure. That's obvious. So when Judge Holden says something like, whatever in creation exists without my knowledge exists without my consent, what does that mean? If there is something that exists, say a particular rock or a particular people's, and it exists without Judge Holden's knowledge, it exists precisely because Judge Holden does not have knowledge of it. Once it comes into his consciousness and he can ascertain knowledge over it, and it still exists, that means the judge has knowledge of it and has decided, yes, you can continue to exist. This is the level of power that Judge Holden wants. We're going to get into it. But that's magic structure. That's obvious. This sort of lust for power, this pre-rational drive for it. There you go. When he says something like, the freedom of birds is an insult to me, again, this should speak to the level that he wants. Birds will conform to his will. He will control nature. And yes, he does believe that. And Cormac makes it so you believe that because he is so hyper-competent and he does know so much. It's incredible. And it's even more incredible when you realize that this is like a historical fiction, essentially, because the Glanton Gang really was a real scalp hunting gang. And Judge Holden was a real person. Now, obviously, he wasn't quite as dramatic or mythologized as he is in this, but apparently the real-life Judge Holden actually was pretty much hyper-competent in everything he did. Maybe not to this level, but it's pretty fascinating stuff. Let's see. And he also, this is another weird thing about the magic structure, he also seems to possess magical abilities, as showcased by his manipulation of the coins when he's giving his monologue about being tethered. That was weird. I thought that was very, very odd. I'll be honest, I'm not entirely sure what Cormac's trying to suggest with there. So all of the world is power/violence. That is, all of the world has been unified, and we're going to break that down when we get to the mythical structure. Essentially, the entire world is unified into a single conception, and that conception is will to power. That's magic structure. Two things. One, unification. Two, will to power. There you go. So there's less with the magic structure just because that really does subsume so much with Judge Holden. Like a lot of it's really some great stuff. All right, now we're going to get into the mythical structure. So this story of the force binding all men. Actually, we'll get to that in the end. So first, let's start with, in this section, we're going to be talking about aspects of the deficient mythical structure, but we're also going to be talking about mythical allusions that Cormac might be making here, which I think will be interesting. So when Cormac writes at the end of the book, Speaking of the judge, he writes, quote, "The great pale dome of his skull shone like a phosphorescent egg in the lamplight," unquote. I believe when he says an egg, a phosphorescent egg, because of course Judge Holden's bald, I think there's a reason he uses the egg. I think he's making a reference to the cosmic egg in mythology. I know India had this. I think some of the Nordic mythologies had this. But the cosmic egg is the egg, or the womb, out of which the world hatched. And aspects of the society that follow this myth organize their society based on this myth. So if the shell falls after hatching in a particular way, like in India, this could be the explanation for their caste systems, right? So you're a part of this shell which fell, I don't know, closer to the whatever, and you fell over here and you fell over there. Well, that's the same caste. And maybe that's complete bullshit, by the way. I'm just kind of making things up. The point is, the world hatched out of this egg. The egg was sort of this creative force. I think when he draws an allusion between the cosmic egg and Judge Holden, when he says his skull shone like a phosphorescent egg, I believe that he is suggesting that when the world was hatched from this egg, Judge Holden was present, which is to say, when the world was hatched from this egg, evil was there, and evil will always be here. I think that's what he's suggesting. This is just my interpretation. You guys are more than welcome to disagree, and if you do, I would love to hear it in the comments. I really would, because this is what makes life fun. This is what makes life meaningful. The transmitting of meaning, narrative, significance. This is feeding the soul. So please, let me know if you guys disagree. Here's another mythical allusion. So as Tobin tells it, Tobin's an ex-priest. He's a member of the Glanton gang. He's one of the more reasonable. There's no good guys in this, by the way. There's not a single good character in this. I think at best there's like two women that I think get like 2 lines each. Maybe that even seems like a lot. They showed some maternal archetype, right? Like they were caring, they were nurturing. They seem like good people. And then the Mexican officials, I don't know if I could say they were good people, but they at least were professional. Unlike the Glanton gang, at least they had a little bit of diplomacy, despite Captain White's racist rant against them, which I thought was funny. So as Tobin tells it, when the Glanton gang met Holden, this is a famous scene because it's an allusion to Paradise Lost, which I'm not going to pretend I'm an expert on. I'm not. I haven't read it. The Glanton gang met Holden in the desert. He was all by himself, and he was just sitting on top of a rock. This is very important. I think this is an allusion to the mythical rock. And Tobin mentions the rock twice, and I think in like quick succession, and I think that's important. So in myth, the rock could symbolize a primordial foundation, which could make sense because that is what Judge was born from. Think about this, right? The rock or stone is dense, inert, static, and perhaps painful. The stone or rock is unshaped matter that always endures and never decays. Hello, quote, he says he will never sleep, he will never die. It's the last sentence of the book. Unshaped matter always endures and never decays. So the always enduring we just covered. He will never sleep. And then with the never decaying, I think this might be the reason why Judge Holden looks like an adult with a 12-year-old's face. He never decays because stone never decays, because stone is a symbol for evil. And that's why Judge Holden was born from the rock. The stone is evil because it endures. It is painful. It is barren. It is without life. It is without any sort of life-giving sustenance. So I think he's making a connection here. And of course, out of the cosmic egg, when you combine these two, I think he's suggesting that, listen, evil will be here, no matter what. How do we make a metaphysic, a philosophy, a religion, a spiritual code out of this? That's what I believe. It's also, the references could represent, too, that evil's nature. Well, there you go. So that evil also is like stone, right? It's always enduring. It never decays. It's hard. It's painful. It's barren. It's empty. Just like the judge. There you go. And like I said, the source of pain, I think, is obvious, right? If you smack your head against a rock, or if someone uses a rock to kill you, or against stone, that's going to be painful. That doesn't sound very life-affirming to me. Yeah, and you could even take this idea of the rock further and the stone further. Take the Grand Canyon, for example. That's a perfect example. It doesn't just stay there. It grows. It progresses. Not progresses in the sense of incremental improvement, but movement from the point of origin. And it becomes more and more complex and more and more and more and more and more complex. I actually went there when I was a little kid. Shout out to my parents who took me there. That was a really cool experience. But the point still stands. Evil functions in this similar way. And then, of course, finally, it could represent the inhuman origins of evil. If Judge Holden is a sort of symbol of evil, and he was born from rock, well, rock, of course, is inhuman. So perhaps evil itself is inhuman, but just ideas. So now we went from mythical allusion. So now we're going to get into the judge's myth. And this is the example of the deficient aspect of the mythical structure. And I also think it's funny that even a rationalist, which we're going to get to, like Judge Holden, even he has a myth. Even he has a story. Even he has a narrative, a significance that hits all of the functions of myth. Cosmological order, societal order, individual order, and a mystical function. It's got all of it. All right, so now we're going to get into Judge Holden's myth. So when talking about why people are at the bar the kid and the judge are conversing at, this is, of course, at the end of the book, which is amazing. The judge asks for a reason as to why they are here. The kid says to either have a good time or they don't have a reason at all. So judge is sitting there, they're drinking, and the kid does not want to talk to the judge because they have a bad history, because the judge is evil. The kid is a piece of shit, but he's not a complete... he hasn't dedicated himself completely to the darkness. There are still very few and very kind of low quality, but signs of compassion. And the last person he wants to talk to is the judge, because he thinks the judge is going to kill him. He says, well, why are people here? Why do people show up to this bar tonight? He says, I don't know. They're here to have a good time, or there's no reason at all. People don't need a reason to be there. So the judge rejects this, saying, quote, they do not have to have a reason, but order is not set aside because of their indifference. He continues, let me put it this way. If it is so that they themselves have no reason and yet are indeed here, must they not be here by reason of some other? And if this is so, can you guess who that other might be? So, there is a transcendent order to the world, and God is the progenitor of this order, moron. So God is the ultimate determiner. So he's saying, no, I don't care what you say about people not having a reason. There is a reason here. If they don't have a personal reason here, they're simply carrying out the will of the transcendent order, which is to say the order that God has imposed on the world. Now, who is God? God is the ultimate determiner, the one responsible for everything. No, the man or the kid answers. So, of course, when he's the kid, and then when 20 years later, at the end of the book, he becomes the man. So, no, can you? So, the man has no idea, or the kid has no idea who God is, and he's asking Judge, who is God? The judge says, I know him well. This is an orchestration for an event, for a dance, in fact. The participants will be apprised of their roles at the proper time. For now, it is enough that they have arrived, as the dance is the thing with which we are concerned and contains complete within itself its own arrangement and history and finale. There is no necessity that the dancers contain these things within themselves as well. In any event, the history of all is not the history of each, nor indeed the sum of those histories, and none here can finally comprehend the reason for his presence, for he has no way of knowing even in what the event consists. In fact, were he to know, he might well absent himself, and you can see that cannot be any part of the plan, if plan there be. So, it is better that the people are ignorant to God's ordering system, because if they weren't, they might destroy the order, and if that's the case, then it calls into question God's order, God's power. Judge rejects that. Also, by the way, I should have mentioned this when I was talking about stone. Remember what Judge Holden says when his famous monologue about war, which, by the way, if you haven't heard it, just type on YouTube, Judge Holden War. It's one of the most amazing things I've ever heard. Just absolutely incredible. But what does he say? He says, war endures. Might as well ask men what they think of what? What they think of stone. Another reference between the endurance of stone and war. But anyways, back to this. There is no free will, only God's plan. Quote, this is the judge. Is not blood the tempering agent in the mortar which bonds? What do you think death is, man? Of whom do we speak when we speak of a man who was and is not? Are these blind riddles, or are they not some part of every man's jurisdiction? What is death if not an agency, and whom does he intend toward? So this God is a violent God, one that deals in death and suffering, and one who directly determines the death of people. It is an agency. So when people die, it's not just this random happenstance. It's not just a bunch of atoms firing off. It is determined. Remember what he said earlier, when he was describing things as an event on themselves, their own beginning, middle, and finale. That's what's happening. I bet the judge would argue that he creates people simply so he can kill them. A man seeks his own destiny and no other, said the judge. Will or nil. Any man who could discover his own fate and elect therefore some opposite course could only come at last to that self-same reckoning at the same appointed time, for each man's destiny is as large as the world he inhabits and contains within it all opposites as well. This desert upon which so many have been broken is vast and calls for largeness of heart, but it is ultimately empty. It is hard. It is barren. Its very nature is stone. This is a fascinating idea for a second. Again, we have more rock symbolism, and it seems that the reason why the desert is permeated by incredibly gruesome violence, and there is some really gruesome violence in this book, like the tree of dead babies, where they kill a bunch of babies and then hang them up on a tree and just kind of let them rot there, or when I can't remember who, I think it might have been Bathcat, when he's just swinging babies by their heel and he's just knocking their heads off against giant rocks. I mean, Jesus Christ, people. And then it's even crazier when you realize that Cormac actually toned it down a little bit, because the real life stories were even worse. I mean, my God, people, just unbelievable. I think this is a very important sentence here. Blood Meridian. So I think Meridian is the highest point, and of course blood meridian. So he's taking the Old West as an epoch, and he's saying this is the height of our violence. It is in many ways a glorification of that, but not in a way that says let's keep doing it, but just saying this is what it is. This is the desert. It is like evil. There is a reason you had the Glanton gangs in the desert. It is because its very nature, the desert, is barren and painful. And that's what you get. And I think that's the reason he wrote this in the first place, because I think he really wanted to deconstruct this idea of the West as this sort of cowboy imagery where everything's good and there's good guys and there's bad guys and there's the good white cowboys and the bad Indians or the bad Mexicans, and that's not what this is, okay? It's in many ways it's postmodern in that sense. So it seems the judge is suggesting that though humans want to control their destiny, they are tragically determined by God, who we'll touch upon in a sec. Quote, "We have dancing nightly, and this night is no exception," said the judge. "The straight and the winding way are one, and now that you are here, what do the years count since What do the years count since we two met together? Men's memories are uncertain, and the past that was differs little from the past that was not. Men's memories may be uncertain, but the past is not a distant epoch that grows farther from you and your consciousness as chronological time progresses. Of course, there are multiple layers of time. Time has a quality, time has an intensity. The past is always present and efficacious simultaneously with the present and the future. So no, the past that differs is very different from the past, or the past that was differs greatly from the past that was not. You have a false rationalist understanding of time. You need to drop that, Judge Holden. Time is a world constituent, as evidenced by the fact that the judge and kid both know exactly the events they're talking about, but the fact that the past is clearly still present and efficacious for the judge. So if the past really was this thing that just was put behind, and as time progresses in a linear sense, you lose conscious awareness of it and it just stops affecting you, how in the world would these two have this conversation at all? It's just ridiculous. Let's see. the time here is the cause of everything the judge does. I mean, the time spent with the kid, quote unquote, caused, if you will, certain memories, thoughts, and other internal latencies that, when integrated with the rest of Judge Holden's psychological constitution, create and condition his current feelings, beliefs towards the kid. So his current beliefs and valuation of the kid and his valuation that the kid is disappointment to him, well, that only came about after, emphasis on the temporal, you spent a bunch of time with the kid. And the time allowed the kid's soul or the kid's moral compass to be embodied and to be sort of lived out, if you will. The past created the present and will create the future so long as it's not fully integrated. So no, it's not some distant thing that might as well never happen. It's efficacious right now, as evident by your presence in this bar. It has the judge, it seeped itself so deep into its consciousness that I don't think the judge even realizes it, which is a great irony because he's so intelligent and competent about everything else. So the judge continues. I'll tell you this. As war becomes dishonored and its nobility called into question, those honorable men who recognize the sanctity of blood will become excluded from the dance, which is the warrior's right, and thereby will the dance become a false dance and the dancers false dancers. And yet, there will be one there always who is a true dancer. And can you guess who that might be? So God, in this view, is an invisible force of will, perpetual activity, imperious action that creates and orders the world. So it's an invisible will that creates and orders the world. It is an active agent, and not only that, and not only is it an active agent that binds men through violence and war, it's not just a will, it's a will to power, which is how violence expresses itself. And violence becomes, under this exclusive will to power, it stops becoming an abomination. It's no longer something we should stop, and it becomes something, it becomes an artistic expression, meaning it's labeled as the dance. Why would violence not take on a poetic, positive labeling or connotation from this view if world is only power and violence is the best way of attaining that power? It's not bad at all. It's a dance. It's beautiful. It evokes, because of course dancing is, there's a certain harmony there. It evokes positive qualities. Well, that's what he's doing with labeling violence as the dance. You ain't nothing, the kid responds. I think there's a literal and metaphorical a literal and figurative meaning to that response there by the man or the kid. You speak truer than you know, the judge answers, but I will tell you, only that man who has offered himself entire to the blood of war, who has been to the floor of the pit and seen horror in the round and learned at last that it speaks to his inmost heart, only that man can dance. This is the problem with the kid. The judge thinks the kid has not done this. He's disappointed in the kid because the kid had potential to go into the pit and say, this is what speaks to my heart. And he said, no, I want a little bit of goodness. And the kid is not a good person, by the way. The kid's a piece of shit. And I just think it speaks to the judge saying, no, you had 2% of compassion, and that's not going to fly. That's not going to happen. Hear me, he says to the kid. There is room on the stage for one beast and one beast alone. All others are destined for a night that is eternal and without name. One by one, they will step down into the darkness before the footlamps. Bears that dance, bears that don't. Now, what is a bear? A bear is a dumb, pre-rational animal. We have reduced what it means to be a human being down to the pre-rational, down to purely our evolutionary, tribalistic, automatic functions. And when you do that, of course, now we get meaningless violence. Violence acting without thinking, but directed in the worst possible way. So, of course, the judge envisions himself to be a sort of king of kings, if you will. God is a will to power that binds all real warriors into conflict. That is what it is. It is that perpetual force, that will to power that binds, through violence, all real warriors into conflict. Knowing that to assert true will over one's surroundings, one must rise against all else in this battlefield of blood. So that's another reason the judge doesn't like the kid, because simply put, there's only room for one on the stage. Only one, not the kid. That's obviously going to be the judge. This is his myth. Of course, as the judge describes it as being the suzerain, this sort of keeper of keepers, the ultimate authority. This myth is bullshit. This myth is complete bullshit. It can only come about when you have deficient magic structure combined with deficient rationalism combined with deficient mythical structure. The efficient aspects of all the structures refute this nonsense. So the deficient aspects of the magical structure is this sort of pre-rational tribalistic violence. The efficient is that the world is a magical place that on its own is its own sort of reward and makes life worth living simply by being connected to the life force of the world. So it depends on how you're using this. So we can drop all that pre-rational. There are benefits to pre-rational. It brings community. It brings the benefits of all these things, of feeling important and all this stuff. That's a good thing. You want that. That makes life enjoyable, meaningful. So no, your myth is wrong because you're only focusing on the deficient, not the efficient aspects. This myth... let me think. Is this a deficient myth? I don't know if the myth itself is necessarily deficient, because it is a story of significance, meaning, and narrative, and that's great. I just really disagree with it. Remember, myth, you have to understand myth. Remember, it's not this fiction created completely detached from any sort of data from the world. It's supposed to touch an aspect of the soul and the world that is so deep and so profound that rationality can't gain access to it. The problem is it doesn't. His myth doesn't really. It's just a dog shit myth. And then, of course, the rationalist... all this only comes about from materialism, privileging life against death, and privileging life over death, viewing death as this void where there's no spiritual other side, there's no spiritual enclosure. That permeates this entire myth. It's complete bullshit. It's also bullshit when you reduce everything to the quantifiably measurable, consciously known. So now we're, speaking of rationalism, now we're getting to the mental structure. So there's some interesting stuff here. So he's always recording scientific information in his book. That is, he's creating representations of things. And I think, as far as I can remember, the chapter is called Representations and Things. So clearly Cormac has thought about this. So in this, let me see if I can move here. So in this, the judge has dualistically divided representation from thing and... unlike most people, has privileged representations over things. Now, normally when you do this, people will privilege the thing over the representation because the thing is more real, quite frankly. I mean, to put it, for lack of a better term, if you take postmodernism, right? When they try to play these language games, no amount of describing biological females as men, even if you play the gender sex difference game, is going to change the physical differences between females and males. So the lesson is you can play all the semantic games with representations that you want. It's not going to necessarily change what is being represented. So that's what he's done. It's a very, 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 very interesting switch the judge has made. And of course that he's the villain and that he's sort of Lucifer or evil, the yang to the yin. I think Cormac's suggesting something here. There's a big problem. Actually, we're about to explain it. So the notations in his ledger to the judge are more real than reality itself. So not only are we obviously touching on the simulacra, but I also think rationalism, again, we can see the triangular thought at play. So simulacra is exactly that, when the representation of reality or the copy of reality becomes more real than reality itself. So when you have people who are not living in the real world, but instead they're essentially living in a TikTok world where they're acting like the cute, dumb, quirky girl. I went on a date with one of these broads. Oh my God, where they're not living in like the world. They're living in some made-up TikTok world. That's a copy of reality, the TikTok world. It's become more real than reality itself. Think this is a kind of a small-scale version, but think of something like, oh, you're such a Rachel, you're such a Ross from Friends, right? The copy is becoming more real than reality itself. Let's see. So in the real world, we see this happen a ton. The examples I just talked about, politics, you see this happen all the time. Everyone's model of reality is more real than actually what's happening. The liberal right, pay attention. So, for example, here's one example. And I know I'm using this one specifically because I think I've heard Cormac talk about this. And Cormac's interesting because he was very laconic. He was less talkative than the kid. The kid says nothing. And I think there's that great line from Holden where he says, "Did you think that because you did not speak, you would not be recognized?" I think that's amazing. if you go to a therapist nowadays and you tell them your problems, they'll filter what you said and reference some chart and say something like, well, 68% of the people who have this symptoms actually have this condition. So think about what's happening here, right? The representation, which is the chart, the model of reality, is being treated as more real than reality itself. So they won't treat you like a fleshed out human being with idiosyncrasies and unique aspects that are totally unique to you, that have a long history of action in the world, and you have an emotional state, you have psychological aspects both collectively and individually. They take all that and they say, okay, well, I'm going to ignore that. I'm not going to ignore all this irrational experiential stuff, and I'm going to appeal almost exclusively to this 3D mental model, and then everything will fall from that. And what they've done is they've dangerously disconnected themselves from reality. Now, I'm not saying that you should toss out all these models, but let's come back here. You have a full-fledged person here. They're telling you what's the problem. Don't necessarily filter everything. Let them express the plenitude and the variance of their soul and all these things, their psyche, but they don't do that. But this is, it's the classic rationalism that we talk about, that bridge example, right? We don't have the consciousness of the bridge, we create models of it, and then the construction workers fulfill it. Quote, this is the judge, of course. These anonymous creatures may seem little or nothing in the world, yet the smallest crumb can devour us. Any smallest thing beneath yon rock out of men's knowing. Only nature can enslave man, and only when the existence of each last entity is routed out and made to stand naked before him will he be properly suzerain of the earth. Very important when he says out of men's knowledge. What does that sound like? Sounds like a rationalist to me who cannot leave that which is shrouded in darkness to be shrouded in darkness. They have to illuminate the darkness, but they can never illuminate the darkness because they're using the wrong tool. And so they have a pseudo illumination that they perceive as the real illumination, and then they screw us all over. What's a suzerain? Asked Tobin. A keeper or overlord. Why not say keeper then? Because he is a special kind of keeper. As suzerain rules even when there are other rulers. His authority countermands local judgments. Remember, there's only one seat at the top. That's God. This is textbook rationalism, baby. And the great irony is, even if you could illuminate the darkness, you would only get partial results, and the judge can't see this. Obviously, you would only get results that were limited to the quantifiably measurable and consciously known. So I don't know what to say. He's just missing. He's just misunderstanding. It's classic rationalism. I almost don't even want to get into it. But when he says anything out of men's knowing is an abomination that should be rooted out, who does that sound like? There you go. 2, this presupposes that God does not exist. Or, worse yet, even if he did, he should be subordinate to man. So nature must be subordinate to man, but also to an extent God. God is going to be subordinate to man. Is this not a very clear hypertrophy of the ego? The ego going way, 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 way too far, where human beings have just gone so egotistical to the point where they seriously, with a straight face, will tell you that God should be subordinate to them? That's rationalism, baby. You would not have that without the rational ego. It's complete bullshit. You need to humble yourself, my friend. Okay, you need to drop this egotism. All right, next one. No man can acquaint himself with everything on this earth, says Tobin. The judge responds, the man who believes that the secrets of the world are forever hidden lives in mystery and fear. Superstition will drag him down. The rain will erode the deeds of his life, but that man who sets himself the task of singling out the thread of order from the tapestry will, by the decision alone, have taken charge of the world. And it is only by such taking charge that he will effect a way to dictate the terms of his own fate, unquote. So obviously, 1, he's referencing the magic structure when he says superstition will drag him down. And his bastardization of it can only come about from an exclusively deficient rationalist perspective. So when he sort of flippantly dismisses, superstition will drag him down, these things, these are magical nonsense. No, actually, that's just a different mode of thought, if you want to call it that. A different mode of realization might be a better word. It's intuition. It's knowledge carried through the automatic instincts, and when integrated with our other faculties, it allows us to live a full human life and to accrue powers that rationalists can simply never conceive. You can only view this stuff from such a demeaning lens from a strictly rational perspective. It's bullshit. Everything that is mysterious is bad. Yeah, we got it, buddy. We know. 2, he's like all rationalists insofar as he believes there exists a single thread of order that, after enough reconciliation, can be ascertained. The problem is, like all rationalists, he is tragically obscured from the fact that his exclusively favored mode of thought compels further division, and thus precludes the possibility of attaining knowledge of the supposed thread of order. So 1, remember with the triangular thought. 1 against another, dualistic antithetical, invoke the third aspect, to reconcile. But then what happens with that third aspect? What happens when you get the synthesis or the privileging of the 1? It becomes 1/2 of the next binary, and then you just restart the process. That's why when you go into a philosophy course and you see the chalkboards, they're completely full to the brim. That's why you go to the math class, you see the chalkboards, they're completely full to the brim. They don't just stop there. It compels further division. That is a reason why you will never be able to find the thread of order. That's number 1. Number 2, I'm not even sure the thread of order exists. Remember, if you're following my Gebser series, we're getting into the a-perspectival manifestations with biology and physics. The lesson of biology and physics since Einstein, essentially, has been that we live in an a-causal world. We don't live in causality anymore. We're in a-causality. We're in discontinuous in accordance with time, because sometimes time is a-causal, sometimes time is discontinuous. It strikes things into being suddenly. That's discontinuous. That's a-causal. So no, you're not. Those 2 reasons will completely destroy your thread of order nonsense. That's not going to happen. Let's see. And also another thing he's painfully missing is that his rational statements don't come in this completely detached vacuum of theoretical invisibility, completely detached from the world. They are being created and conditioned by his pre-rational drive to attain and impose order, meaning he can never come to a purely rational solution because his consciousness is not purely rational. Hello, moron. Let's see. 3, the emphasis of fate is important. So fate, under the rational view, is something that is created. Think manifest destiny, right? I create my own. This is big on the West in America, the hero's journey. We create our own fate. Carl Jung, we individuate ourselves. We come to know who we are. Everything's focused on the ego and the individual and his creative powers. It's not like Kismet, which you have with the Arabs, right? So Kismet is the idea that God has come down and has imparted your fate to you. So rather than you creating the fate, God has imparted it to you. As Judge Holden has it, it's all about creating your own. He rejects that. This is ego-willing. This makes sense in the rational structure. Let's see. The hypertrophied ego cannot bear to allow any outside forces, spiritual or otherwise, to affect his fate or destiny. It's only the ego, only the rationalist will. Everything else be damned. It either doesn't exist, shouldn't exist, or both. And finally, we are finally to the end, the integral structure. I just have one very, very quick thing to say about this. I think there's a reference to Schrodinger's cat or the kid's outhouse. I believe what happens to the kid in the end in that outhouse is a reference to Schrodinger's cat. Is the kid dead or alive? Is the electron spin up or spin down? Don't know until you consciously measure. I think that's a reference to that. And that, I believe, will end at least this part. If I think of more stuff, I'll probably come up with the part 2, but I'm not sure I will. Maybe I will, but I don't know. I hope you guys enjoyed. Please read this book, by the way. This book's awesome. I adore this book. I think it's amazing. Again, kind of like I said in the beginning, I understand if you don't, because the writing is very inaccessible, and there's a lot of 19th century words being used, and it's the way it's organized. It's almost like the Bible. The amount of run-on sentences in this is just incredible. The how many run-on sentences he employs. And when people say, when Tobin speaks or the kid speaks, there's no quotation marks. So sometimes it can be kind of difficult to follow. But there's a reason for that. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope you guys maybe were inspired to pick up this book. If you guys want, you can just look up the Judge. scenes, I guess, on YouTube, and they'll have the audiobook, and they'll have nice little stuff. There's also great Judge Holden analysis if you want. Shout out to Right Conscious. Ian, he's a good guy. He's kind of a friend of the channel. I would love to talk to him one day. He has a ton of great Cormac McCarthy analysis. I mean, he really is the internet, at least, go-to Cormac guy. He's read all of his books a trillion times. He's got great Judge Holden character analysis videos. And please go check out Right Conscious Ian. He's amazing. And join his literary renaissance, because I think it's important. I love you guys. I will see you soon. And I love you.